says gender is a spectrum.
Chuck, I respectfully disagree.
Hate speech. Let's get into it right now with Hollie Hughes, with Bronwyn Bishop, and, well, none other than the freedom fighter, that is Stephen Conroy, joining us now from Melbourne. All right, let's just start here with a principle and work our way back. Stephen, why don't we just regulate and tax vaping as opposed to this, let's pretend we're going to go off and ban it because it's been oh so successful banning all those other illicit drugs that are now so popular in parts of the country that they're about to be decriminalised in Queensland, which effectively is 10% of the entire youth offenders rate. Forgive me if I'm slightly confused that we're electing members to Parliament who want to legalise cannabis at the same time as we're playing the home game at the National Press Club saying vaping is the problem, vaping is the problem.
Well, look, there's about 3 or 4 different topics you've bundled up in there. On the question of the marijuana, the marijuana issue, I think depending on the type of marijuana, and there's some incredibly potent types of marijuana, there can be serious health effects. And I think that's a very legitimate argument to point out to those who want to go down that path. But on the core issue that you're raising, when cigarettes were around, at best you might have had maybe a menthol brand. And everyone decided ultimately we wanted to go down the path we've done, plain packaging. We haven't banned them, you can still do it. What you're seeing with vaping, though, is something entirely different. You've got an attempt by the tobacco companies to attract younger and younger people to use the product. And they're almost grooming kids into moving into tobacco in the future. And so these flavours in particular, they didn't do it for adults. They didn't have flavoured ones. As I said, we had 50 years of tobacco. Menthol was the best they came up with that people might want. So these flavoured vapes that are being used to attract kids into the market need to be dealt with. And congratulations to Mark Butler for what he announced yesterday.
But Hollie, this scenario. And again, you've done parliamentary committee work on all.
I actually chaired an inquiry on it, so I've got a little bit of,
right. So
insight.
So to the point. So just quickly, a couple of the points before I get into response to what we're trying to talk about tonight. Of what Stephen's just said, is there evidence in Australia that existing tobacco companies are funding?
No.
These products?
Absolutely
They're being sold
not.
under their banner?
No. Most of the illegal vapes that are actually available in these convenience stores, etc., are actually coming from China, and they're not made by tobacco companies. The legal vapes that are currently being sold through through pharmacies for people that have a prescription, they are actually generally produced by either Australian or New Zealand companies. So they're actually manufactured by small businesses who are manufacturers that have set up these businesses. There is actually very few big tobacco companies that have moved into this space.
So do you think that we should be doing what I suggested?
I'm sorry,
here,
that's just not true.
It is absolutely true,
it's just
Stephen.
Not
and
true.
If you go to Philip Morris, they don't even make vapes. They make an e-cigarette.
Donald Trump,
which is different from a vape.
Donald Trump was going to ban the vapes and the flavoured vapes at the behest of Melania.
Well,
and
let
then
me
Donald
tell
Trump
you,
was got to by
sitting
not
on
Chinese
an inquiry
importers.
for a number of months and listening to experts.
He was got to by the tobacco companies.
Why
in
are
the
Australians'
US.
lungs
That's
different from in the UK? In the UK, in New Zealand, if a pregnant woman smokes, she is actually moved to vaping because it is 95% safer than cigarettes. The other claim that tobacco companies are somehow using blueberry flavour to move people to a cigarette is ridiculous.
As they are in the US.
They are not. You look at youth smoking rates, they are declining
Trump was going
everywhere.
To ban them,
if people going from vapes are going
Trump
to tobacco, youth smoking rates would be increasing.
And it wasn't Chinese importers.
I've never heard you advocate for Trump so heavily. Trump got a few things wrong, Stephen, you might remember.
The tobacco,
he got a few things wrong, and trying to ban
companies,
vapes was
the
one
US
of them.
Tobacco companies.
Seriously, you do it, legislate it, regulate it, put an excise on it. One of the reasons I think they're bringing this in, and if you were a true cynic, you'd be there with me. Jim Chalmers was complaining not long ago that $5 billion was going to be lost because people had moved from tobacco to vapes, because it is one of the most successful smoking cessation tools in the world, ever. More people have quit smoking and moved to vaping successfully than any other smoking cessation tool. But what they've done now, funny, we're going to get a $3.5 billion bump to help make up for that excise that's being lost by people that have moved from cigarettes to vaping. We also have a situation where if you remove the flavours, and people quit smoking quite often using these tools, using a tobacco flavour because that's what they're used to.
Yeah, there's a bunch of teenagers who've never smoked a cigarette in their life that are starting with this.
And then they progress to a flavour because it is more pleasant. Those people will be forced back to smoking if they are unable to continue to use and get their nicotine through this. So it's win-win for the government on tobacco excise.
Bronwyn, who's been wildly patient, and I appreciate it. What about there are all of these confusing messages, right? Decriminalising of drugs in Queensland. Election of legalised cannabis people who are now in a position to make this happen in New South Wales and Victoria. Federal government, vaping's the new thing that we have to go after, but what we're really doing is finding a way to increase the huge amount of tax. If it's lead paint, you ban it, you don't tax it. So if we've made the decision that, you know what, it's not lead paint, we're going to legalise it, we're going to regulate and we're going to tax it, why not for vapes, pot as well?
There are 2 points that we have to address. One is the sheer hypocrisy, which what you're talking about, but there's a big distinction between the legalisation of possessing and using for yourself drugs which affect the brain, can give you psychosis, make you behave in a way that you belt and bash other people, and people who are having a vape. Very big distinction. The second point is this, that the most important thing that happened today is that interest rates went up.
100%.
And what are we talking about? Vaping. Why do you think he came out and made that statement today?
Fair point.
Because interest rates went. And why did they go up? Because the RBA is saying to the government, you are not doing your bit. You're going to bring out a budget which is going to increase spending.
You have got to get out more.
And will feed inflation. And the RBA says, cop this.
But how much of it also, Stephen,
is them saying... Bronwyn, this conspiracy theory, no one expected the Reserve Bank to put up interest rates. When Butler organised the press club...
Why do you think we're talking about it? The most important thing that happened today...
organised the press conference, no one thought there was going to be an interest rate rise.
My goodness, you've been...
Yes, nobody. The market said no change.
Well, in fairness
oh
here,
my God.
I always back...
You've got to get out more. It's too many conspiracy theories.
This is what was written today, front page Sydney Morning Herald. Financial markets had said there was a 100% chance that the RBA was going to hold the cash rate steady.
Correct.
Most economists also believed that the bank would pause. So why did they jump where they jumped?
Very simple. The governor's about to be sacked.
Yes.
The government is spending money like there's no tomorrow. They're putting up, there's a wage increase coming through for 300,000 people, 15% increase on the 1st of July. They're talking about putting up JobKeeper. They've just spent $35 billion, which they say is off budget. They're going to be spending, of the $90 billion that's going to come in as extra revenue, are they going to take that off the bottom line? Not on your Nelly. So what you've got coming is the Reserve Bank was bound, in my view, and it's not something I'm doing with hindsight. I always thought they would put up interest rates this month.
So, Stephen, also just want to point out to people, one of the things that goes into the basket of goods in and around that we decide inflation on is tobacco. So an increase in taxes is going to also lead to a potential change in the mix of what's happening with inflation. But watch this space. They'll take tobacco out of the basket of goods when they're reorganising everything with the new Reserve Bank. But how often do you think it's going to be, or how nakedly obvious is this, that the Treasurer has said the current people who set interest rate policy won't be getting it? There'll be a second board that'll be doing it. So this is them responding or say, all right, right up you, pal.
But I'm with you 100%, Paul. I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, let's be impolite. Let's not use polite words. The government sacked the Reserve Bank board because of its performance on interest rates. The polite description is, we're creating a second board of experts. The board was sacked. The governor is next. I'm with you 100%, Paul. He this was just vengeance. And last month's minutes, this is the hilarious part. They are so desperate to back up their analysis, they're claiming that in a few years' time there could be an inflationary impact from the immigration that the government's got coming through over the next 12, 18 months. And that's a reason why they've got to put up interest rates. Oh, my God, these people are so desperate.
Which is
so
why we're talking about
to confirm their failed analysis. No one is trying to pretend, other than you, Bronwyn, in your little world of conspiracies, no one is trying to pretend that vaping is a distraction to interest rates.
You're the one
Nobody
in the
but
liberal
you,
socialist
Bronwyn.
world.
You are Robinson Crusoe on this one.
So, OK, what about the expectations of the budget? As I said, the Essential poll today, 45% of people say they have an expectation about something happening on cost of living. Interest rates, on top of everything else, everything costs more than it did 12 months ago. What can the government possibly deliver? Because if they turn around and say $1,500 cash for everyone, firstly, $0 move forward for people because that's the tax increase.
Yeah.
But the argument is if they did decide to cut a $1,000 cheque, that would be inflationary.
Well, it is inflationary.
If people have an expectation that the government that promised it will all get better under them has an opportunity to do so in the budget, can they possibly deliver on their own expectations here?
Well, they promised 97 times before the last election that power bills would go down by $275. Try getting one member of the ALP to even say that number. It's just incredible. So unless they're bringing in the $275 energy rebate somehow or other for people's electricity bills, cost of living, well, we've seen people today are going to take another hit on their mortgage. If you smoke, you're going to pay more for your cigarettes. Everything we know has gone up. I don't see how this government can deliver any cost of living pressure because everything they're doing is increasing spending and putting pressure everywhere in the economy. And their rush to renewables is creating more problems. It's everywhere you look, there's more and more problems. And how the Australian people are still looking at this government and thinking that they're delivering on what they said pre-election, I have no idea because every promise they made has been broken.
So let's ask the political question here, right? Which is, 12 months on from a central promise of we will bring down cost of living. Everything costs more. The lady that we showed you in the editorial is, I think, representative of hundreds of thousands of people at night. Yet the opinion polls keep getting better for the government. Why?
Well, it's still having a honeymoon. It's as simple as that. And the Prime Minister, what do we see him doing? Does he actually do any work? No. He jets around and visits this one. It doesn't matter, it's tennis or billionaires barbecue, or now we're off to the coronation, or we'll trip over to see someone in New Zealand, or we'll trip up to see someone somewhere else. He's never there. And when they think he's perhaps on the verge of doing something that might be a bit damaging, he goes away for a holiday for a week. So I'm not surprised at all. We will start to realise soon that Mr Chalmers was, of course, the main advisor to the former Treasurer, Mr Swan. We will start to see the problems that they are creating for this country, and people will be impacted. In the meantime, we are being distracted by talking about things that ought not to be front and centre when we're in this dramatic phase of really recovering from what happened in COVID. And you might recall I was very critical of the huge expenditure of money in that period. We are paying for that now. But the huge accent that has been put on rolling out this new infrastructure to carry renewables when there is not going to be enough power to supply everybody, rationing will become part and parcel of the management of our economy. So then we'll start to see some dramatic changes.
So, Stephen, apart from their innate awesomeness, how does it work that during the campaign, cost of living, will go down if you elect a Labor government, 12 months later it isn't? And that doesn't mean they're getting ready to change their vote tomorrow. No, but I'm saying, I get it, there's not residual love of the former government, but how does it keep getting better
the public
when
aren't
things are getting
falling
worse?
for Bronwyn's rope-a-dope. No, but the punters aren't falling for the rope-a-dope arguments that Bronwyn just made. Power stations closed down and announced they were closing down under the Liberal Party government.
Well,
and the consequence of that is supply is being shortened.
I think you might have heard my criticism of Mr Morrison.
So, unlike Bronwyn, the punters aren't going
to Glasgow.
Oh dear, there's a shortage of baseload power because of this government, because of the Labor government. They're going, well, these shortages that are created in baseload power, which you're all complaining about.
There is no baseload power.
We think the Liberal Party did that.
Stephen.
So they're not going elbows to blame because Liddell closed. They're not putting the rope-a-dope exercise that Bronwyn's involved in, Paul.
They're not feeling, Stephen,
this budget is the first time that Labor will be making serious decisions.
So what was the
which
October budget?
The punters will begin to make judgments on. And unlike, I'm sorry, I love Hollie, but I'm going to have to disagree with her. The problem that Hollie's arguments have got is spending was done under the Liberal government. You will actually see reductions in spending in the budget. You will actually see a balance.
35 billion off
Hollie, what are you going to say? What are you going to say if there's a budget surplus at the end of the next financial year?
That we should be mining more and getting some of those resources out to those international customers. Because look at those tax...
Your arguments are going to go up in smoke. If Jim Chalmers delivers a budget at the end of the next financial year, you are like the emperor with no clothes. Every argument you're making today will be vanished by the end of the next